coming down. I never left it on the ground. I'm not coming down. I wanna go higher, higher, higher than this.
Hello, this is Rebecca Fleetwood Hession, host of the Badass Women's Council podcast. In today's episode, we have a recent recipient of the Indianapolis Business Journal's 40 Under 40. Her name is Meggie Dials, and she's the Senior Regional Vice President of Enterprise Sales for Salesforce. And I'm not even going to give it any more introduction. It's an amazing episode about intentionality of your personal brand. Let's do it. Hey, Meggie, how's it going?
Good. How are you?
Super good. So I got your permission to call you Meggie with the good hair.
Yes, you did. I'm happy with that compliment. Thank you.
So before we get into the amazing credentials that you have and the celebration of you being on the Indianapolis Business Journal's 40 Under 40, I just think you have amazing freaking hair. It drives me crazy.
Well, I appreciate it. I will say good genes, right? I can't take too much credit for it, but I also have a stylist here in Indy who I love and has been with me for a long time. So if anyone gets credit, it's him.
We should maybe shout him out, you think? Or do you not want him booked up?
Well, I mean, it's Phil. I wouldn't even give you his last name. He works out of the Blue House downtown. But yeah, he's hard to get into. So I don't think I'm gonna screw myself over too badly.
Yeah, if you find a good hair person, I book mine out for the year.
Oh, it's smart. I tried to do that, but with my travel schedule, I end up having to move things around. But he's pretty good about being flexible for me.
That's awesome. Because, here at the Badass Women's Council, everybody's, wanting to make sure we've got some good hair referrals. So
that's right. I hear it.
But not necessarily what we're going to chat about the entire episode. Congratulations. So
Thank you.
IBJ just announced the 40 Under 40, and there you are with your good hair.
Thank you. Yeah, it was really exciting. I did find out a couple of months ago, but to see it all come to light and everybody to be super supportive was a lot of fun. Still is a lot of fun.
Oh, good. And I really want to dig into how you get there or why you would want to get there, because I know when we look at those celebrations and we open the IBJ and we just think, oh, those people are so amazing. You just didn't wake up and accidentally end up on this list. So right. I'd like for you to talk about the intentionality that you put into getting there, because you really were intentional about setting your sights as a goal to be 40 Under 40. Tell us about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't know how everyone else's story is. I'm sure there are people that get nominated and they have no idea it's happening and they get this announcement and it's really exciting. And they didn't think about it the way I did. So I'm not expecting that everybody did it my way. But I think for me, it was in my earlier 30s. I just turned 39 a week and a half ago or so. And in my early 30s, I knew it was a thing. I saw it. I followed it. I always paid attention every February when it came out. And I wanted to be part of it. I think just as someone who's always been goal driven and achievement driven, it was something that was fun for me to strive for. And I knew it was going to take a decent amount of years, because it's not something you can just say, hey, the past 6 months I've done some great stuff. I hope somebody notices. So for me, it was, to your point, very intentional. And it seemed the majority of the people that were honored in 40 Under 40 had a strong professional background, but also had a strong community leadership. And so that drove a lot of kind of my decisions around where to serve within certain boards, within fundraising, volunteer work, et cetera. How was I able to use, whatever talents and skills I might have in my professional work and lend those into the community from a service perspective. So that was sort of bucket number one. And then bucket number two was certainly professionally. The way that I act or drive professionally has nothing to do with 40 Under 40, but of course I like to be able to have a story to tell on what I've done and what obstacles I've overcome. What does it mean? How I might be setting myself apart from my peers. And so I think, that certainly didn't hurt that I had a good story in that regard. And then also just kind of my thoughts and point of view around Indianapolis. I love the city. I know we all do. But really a big pivotal point for me was being selected for the Stanley K. Lacey Leadership Series. I was in class 43, which was last year. You have to apply. It's a pretty rigorous application. And a big part of that application is what you've done professionally, what you've done in the community, and how you see Indianapolis in the future? What's your vision, and how could you improve some of the areas that are really struggling? And so kind of serving in that last year of classwork and meeting a bunch of our community leaders and understanding more where there's some struggle areas, that was a big part of 40 Under 40 for me as well, because of Leadership Indianapolis said that I was good enough to be in that class. And I think that also put me in line to be considered for 40 Under 40.
I love that. So the way I framed it when we talked earlier was it's intentional, but also holistic. So you looked at it from the perspective of not only are you a top performer for Salesforce as your employer, but you also really are digging into being intentional about how can you use your gifts and talents, which is what we talk a lot about here on the podcast. How can you use those in the community? So you chose service opportunities, whether it be boards or otherwise, that really fit for you so that you could have impact.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the boards I serve on is Indianapolis Classical Schools, which most people know as Heron High School and Riverside High School. And I've been on that for maybe just under a year or so. But my mom was a teacher, third grade teacher my whole life. And she, retired after 30 some years doing that. So public education and just education in general was something that my family really believed in. So being able to be on the inside of a school board is just fascinating. And it's also, it's a working board. I mean, we're approving important things and having real discussions. It's not just, the updates, the minutes, the financials, and move on. And so to your point, that was something that was really personal to me. I had some insight from just my mom and obviously being a student myself at one point, but also kind of living in the neighborhood that it serves. And so that was a great example of something that I do believe I can add value, but I'm also learning a ton in the process.
And it's always so encouraging to hear that, because so often you hear the other side of the equation where people that are on boards just for the LinkedIn profile and not really because they cared about the cause. And I am very passionate about education myself. So it warms my heart to know that people like you are in there digging in and making the right choices. Yeah.
It is. It's great.
It's good stuff. Well, you mentioned story, because that's the thing that really I think is interesting for our listeners to think about. What is that story of overcoming? We all look at our lives and we think, well, when I get caught up, I'll go do something great like that. Or if I hadn't had that failure 15 years ago that still I carry around with me, or some sort of just story we tell ourselves that holds us back. And I find it really inspiring when we see people like you who are doing amazing things to know a little bit about your story and maybe the backstory. Is there anything that you think would be interesting for our listeners to know about that?
Yeah, I mean, the good news for me is I don't have a massive storied past where I have some big traumatic event or something that I had to overcome. And I know a lot of people do. So I'm lucky in that regard. I think there's probably two areas that have shaped me quite a bit. And one of them is just my dad. He was sick with Parkinson's disease for 19 years. Actually, yesterday was the 4th anniversary of his passing. And so, I think just being a close-knit family and watching him struggle, and watching my mom as a caretaker, and now she's got her own disease she's dealing with. And so I think just in general, health, and the fact that we take it for granted so many days and so many people cannot, watching my dad have to think about taking a step and think about not choking and think about trying to write, all the things that we take advantage of and are just innate for us. I think it gave me an appreciation on some of the more simple things. And then I think the other piece would be just around when I think professionally, I work in technology, and though things are changing rapidly and we're improving dramatically, women are still a minority in the technical space. And so, working with a lot of men, working underneath a lot of men from a leadership perspective, I learned some of my very best mentors are men, but it's, how do we sort of flip the script, and how do we become unapologetic about calling things out? And so I think over time, I got a little more swagger where I felt I could do that. I definitely did it in the beginning, but as I have been successful and I've built up my personal brand within Salesforce, I now feel like my voice is strong and can be heard, and I can bring things out. Like, for example, I've got a new team that works for me this year, and it's all white men. And as we're putting the teams together and we're, putting heads in organizational boxes and trying to figure out where everybody's going to go, it was the first thing I said in notice and said, hey, this isn't a diverse team. We got to find a way to fix that. Right. And so it wasn't something we could do immediately, but it is something that is on me as the leader to find a way to solve for. And it's not like they're not great white men, they are. But at the same time, we don't learn if we don't add diversity. So I think that's something that many women in technology and a lot of other spaces and certainly other underrepresented minorities have as well. But it's been a big part of my success. And I think it was part of the story that the IBJ took to as well.
I love that. I know I find it ironic every single day that my business is centered around women, because I was one of the ones early in my career that didn't want to stand out for being a woman. I wanted to stand out for my results.
Yeah.
And I felt really uncomfortable with women's movements or organizations in the early days. So I'm talking, 20 years ago, because I thought that why would I want special privilege is the way that I saw it in the early days. But then I later learned exactly what you said, how to leverage my results to have a louder voice that then I realized could and should be powerful in that space. So I love that sentiment and that you're really intentional about it.
Yeah, I think your point's really valid because I was just filling out a questionnaire, maybe it was yesterday, that said, what is the best decision you've made over the past few years in your career? And my answer was, when I got to ExactTarget/Salesforce, I was surrounded by such talented humans that I knew I just had to put my head down and work harder than everybody else. I had to be there earlier. I dressed up more formally than everybody, like everything I was going to do to the next degree, because I felt like I had to. And it wasn't until I felt like I could build up that success and that reputation of being achieved that I could, to your point, start having a voice. And maybe that's the wrong way to approach it. Maybe other people walk right in and they're vocal about the inequalities they see. But I felt very similar to you, which was, let me first show you what I can do. And then let's talk about some of the other things.
Yeah. I think mine was a little more defiant in the early days. I just wanted people to leave me alone and let me do my job. And the way that I could do that was by blowing out my goal every year. If you're 120% a goal, everybody leaves you alone. So I'm like, I'm just going to do that so I don't have to deal with it. But then I found that at 120% of goal, people are also looking over and saying, hey, could you share? Could you help? Could you be a voice? And so then I started to take that a little more seriously. But I think originally it was just, how can I keep from having to talk to my boss any more than possible?
It's a good strategy.
It worked.
Your numbers.
It absolutely worked. And I had the opportunity to stalk you a little bit on LinkedIn and social media and otherwise. And one of the things that stands out to me, especially on your LinkedIn, the people that have recommended you, they talk about what I would say is the real balance between IQ and EQ, which is exactly what I hear coming out in the stories you're telling right now. Is not only are you wicked smart to go in and get the job done, but you know how to do it by surrounding yourself with the right people and thinking about the impact of your choices.
Yeah, thank you. I love the idea and the study of emotional intelligence. I've actually gone back to my alma mater and taught some seminar classes on it because I think it's just fascinating. And I think it is probably got some traction recently, but for a long time, people weren't really thinking about self and social awareness and self and social regulation and how critical that can be, especially when you're working in teams and groups and with customers. And so, figuring out that balance and having a good idea of, going back to your word, intentional, I think is really, really important. And it's, not always easy to do, but it is something that is really important to me.
And I just, I see the things, we follow each other on some different social media platforms. Yeah. You just, and you're not afraid to just show up and be funny, right? You're just like, I'm me. Here's how it goes. I'm kicking ass, and I'm gonna just say it like it is. So I always have an appreciation for that.
I try. I think I'm very funny. I don't know that everybody else does, but I agree. I mean, levity just adds so much to so many situations that I just don't think we all need to be serious at all times. So, and I learned from the best. My mom is very good at self-deprecation and so I feel like, sometimes that can also be a little disarming as long as it doesn't get too dramatic. So it's pretty fun.
That same situation in our house last night. My son was going through a pretty significant challenge yesterday, and we can always come up with some decent inappropriate humor to put things back in perspective. So I'm a fan.
Yeah, I love it.
Tell us, one of the things that we talk about a lot on the Badass Women's Council podcast is, how do you deal with those, what I call the little bitch in your head? So every strong woman you've ever met also has that little bitch in her head that sometimes just tells her all kinds of things about not being enough and being some people would call it fear. What I know it to be is uncertainty. What does your little bitch in your head say, and how do you deal with her?
Oh gosh, I never thought about it as a little bitch, but you're right. That's such a good way to put it. I would say the majority of that voice is usually about image, and I hate to say that because it sounds so superficial, but I think as someone who's really vacillated in weight and struggled with losing weight, gaining weight, all of the above, that's the voice that gets loud, and it's also the dumbest voice because it shouldn't matter, right? But at the same time, often it is where confidence comes from me. So I don't know that I handle it super well. I've definitely gotten better about it, but I think, trying to go back to talent and intelligence and value, and to your point, humor, a lot of those things are so much more important. And so often I try to rely on those. And then other times I think I wish I saw myself the way that other people see me, because I, of course, like everybody, am the first to find my flaws. Like, you take family photos and you just stare at yourself before you stare at your kids or your husband, and you're like,
Right.
oh, why do I have that double chin? And I literally, like, my husband posted a really sweet birthday message on Instagram, and I was like, could you please have me like approve the photo you choose? Like, why did you choose that photo? He's like, well, you look so happy. And I was like, but I have 3 chins. And he's like, but you look so happy, right? Like, great example of how he sees me versus how I see myself. So I don't know. I don't have a great answer to it. I just think I'm open, and I'm constantly trying to improve in that area. And I think rationally, I know the way to handle it. It's just sometimes emotionally, you just can't, you let it get too loud.
Amen. And I know it's encouraging for other strong women to hear that you struggle with those same things too. Have you found that being a mom is helpful with that? Because
Yes.
you have young, because I always could look at my little girl and think, I've got to model this differently for her because I don't want to pass on this insecurity. And it kind of helped me up my game.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I've always said, like, the cycle stops with us, right? The generational cycle of talking about weight ad nauseum, like, it's just not going to happen in our family, and we're never going to use the fat word. And I even stop myself. Sometimes I look at her and I'm like, oh my gosh, you're so beautiful. And I tell her that, and then I instantly say, and you're smart, and you're sporty, and you're fun, and you're nice. And, like, because I don't want it to be all about looks, right? So I do think that's been really helpful. And then also just being a mom in general. I mean, hell, like, we birthed babies and we created babies, and then we, tried to get our bodies back in working order. And then we also have jobs. And I think that gives me a little bit of permission, I think, to not be perfect in the way that I'd like to be. And so I agree. I do think after being a mom, some of those worries just fall to the wayside. And yet you also want to model the things that are most important for your kids.
Yeah, absolutely. I was the same way with my daughter. She was so freaking cute. And everybody on the street would just stop to tell her how beautiful she was. And I thought, oh my gosh, what's going to happen to her brain? So I always tried to overcompensate with all the other things that you were talking about.
Yeah, it's funny we think with my son, he's almost 2. And, we're the house that always has friends over. And we also have a lot of friends that don't have kids. So they just love our children. And my little boy, Hugo, he'll do something, and then he looks at all the friends like, okay, where's the applause? Like, because he's so used to it. And I think, oh God, I'm creating a monster. But I'm like, it's okay. He'll have his head knocked down a few times, I'm sure, at some point.
Fill him with some good self-esteem before you send him out in the world. Right. I like it. I'm a fan for sure.
Yeah,
for sure.
It's cute.
Well, I love this conversation so much, and I appreciate, even though we've, only met a couple of times, I immediately felt this sense of kind of just camaraderie with you, and I appreciate you taking the time today, and this intentionality that you've been able to display with your career really does set an example. And especially when you think about pouring into our community, I know the thing that I'm most excited about in this stage of my career, and the reason that I started my company and the Rise and Thrive group that I have, that's not similar to Stanley K. Lacey, because that's been around for a long time and is certainly an anchor in our community. But I aspire to be something similar to that, to have women leaders that are going to pour back into the community, because I didn't have that early in my career. I was on an airplane all the time, or I was traveling somewhere else, and I didn't feel that same relationship with my community. And now in this second stage of my career, I'll be damned, I'm getting it. I'm going to be a part of this community. I'm just working my way in and saying, here I am, like it or not.
I love that.
I love that that's been your focus early on.
No, I love that too. And I love, what you talk about is people really figuring out what their gifts and talents are and how to use them and how to bring them, every single day. And it's something that I always talk about and I always use in an interview is asking, what's your superpower? And a lot of times it's really interesting when people don't have an answer. And I expect not everyone's been asked the question, but I do think hopefully most of us have sort of identified what's the thing that makes me tick? What's the thing I bring to the table? And so I love that, you call them gifts and talents. I call them superpowers, but either way, we're kind of on the same page there.
Absolutely. And I did one of the interviews I saw that you did with the IBJ after the announcement was they ask you something similar to that. And you said, you better like what you do and find some sense of happiness in it because you don't want to wake up on Sunday morning dreading Monday. And I thought, yes,
it's true. Right. I remember I worked in a job and downtown we'd had some massive windstorm and it like blew out a couple windows, not in the building I was in, but in another building. And so none of those people could go to work. And I remember on Sunday thinking, gosh, wish I worked in that building so I wouldn't have to do my job tomorrow. And that was like holy
red
shit.
Red alert.
You're in the wrong job because you just wish that your windows were blown out so you didn't have to go to work. I think it's time to reevaluate. So yes, I think it's really important to, if you have the privilege to find something you love, then you should.
Absolutely. And I think it's more than privilege. Oftentimes it's courage, right? So there are opportunities out there. And if you can courageously seek the one that fits you best, it will serve you for a long time.
That's exactly right.
So what's the next 20 years look like? So you've got the accolades of the 40 under 40. Are there any big dreams in Meggie Dials future when you're done, changing the world of Salesforce? Anything?
Right. Is there a 60 under 60? No, I actually don't know. It's a great question. I think, one of the things I said last year was that I was going to be really intentional about my year and say no more than I said yes, because I think I was spreading myself too thin. And it's so hard not to accept new challenges and new offers and new exciting adventures. And so I just think at the stage I am in life with my children and my job and traveling for work all the time, I needed to sort of put a stop on that. So it's almost, I'm doing the opposite of what I normally do. I'm not creating all these goals and things to achieve. I'm trying to actually sort of like hunker down in the world that I live in and just be really present within that. And so that feels good for now. I just know myself to know that's not going to last forever. And at some point I'm going to need that next big exciting thing. I don't know what it is. I heard I was in a brain mastery class last week at work. And one of the things they said was, goals are for people that haven't made the decision yet. And it was kind of a black and white way to look at goals. Like it's not really a goal, you just go make the decision. But I liked that. And I thought I'm going to try to frame that rather than having a bunch of goals. What's the thing I'm just going to decide to do and then make everything about that decision? So that's kind of where my head's at, but I don't have an answer for what the decision is yet.
I love that. I used to get a lot of weird stares because people would ask me what are your goals? What are the next 10 years? And I would say, I don't know. I haven't created it yet. I just always had that perspective of I'm about find a gap and fill it. And so I don't know what that's going to be in a year or 2 years, but I'm not afraid to go after it once I find it. Yep.
No, I think that's exactly right. I mean, it's, and isn't it fun to not know what's behind door number 1 or door number 2, right? It's
absolutely. And as spiritual as I am, I just feel like God's got a better plan. I'm just going to let that stuff unfold and just be ready when he shows it to me.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's great. And I think, as much as we can, one of these other things they talked about in this brain class was about create the state. So, you create the state that you want to be in. So if you want to be successful, then you think about success, which impacts your feelings, which impacts the outcome. And so it was, again, oversimplification, but I liked the idea of, once I know what I want that to look like, how do you back and then create it? And so I think kind of getting out of that victim mentality and figuring out what that looks like it's exciting. And I feel like I have the tools to do it. I just got to know, what the destination might be.
My word for this year is expectant, which is in line with that. Yeah. Last year it was intentional and this year it's expectant. So I've put a lot of intentions out there and now I'm just expecting it all to be fabulous and work out.
I you know what? I think that's awesome.
Yeah. It feels good. I mean, and there are times when I find myself in a sense of, oh my gosh, what's going to happen? I don't know. I put this out there. Is anybody going to show up? And then I just stop myself and I go, oh, hold on. This year, we're just expectant. I'm expecting it to go well. And it changes things. It changes how I feel about a lot of things.
And so question for you on that, if something doesn't go as well, because often, they say what disappointment is just because you set your expectations the wrong way or whatever. So, if it doesn't go fabulously, do you find yourself kind of recreating maybe what fabulous means so that you have a positive outlook on it?
Yeah, I always look for the learning. So is there something in this that I can learn from, either in what I did or what's my response to what's happening? And I'm always trying to think about what's the ripple effect of whatever decisions I make. So oftentimes it's just, how can I deal with disappointment, and what does that need to look like for whoever I'm showing up for, whether it's family or clients or whatever. I wish I was less self-aware sometimes. I wish I had a button I could turn off my self-awareness, because it's freaking exhausting sometimes. Like sometimes I just want to move through the world as a slacker and not really care. But I can honestly say that I probably think about every freaking decision and thought that I have more than most people.
Yeah.
It's exhausting. But I do try to learn from it and just reframe.
I think that's awesome. But I agree. There's times I feel like I float outside of my body and I watch myself. And then I'm like, why is she doing that? But to your point, it's like a new degree of self-awareness that I don't want. I don't want to overthink that. I just want her to go do her thing and not have to be judged by me, So sometimes I find myself a little too self-aware as well.
Yeah. And my solution is either a long run or a really long pour of Cabernet or a Manhattan. So I try to just balance those out.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I think that's good. It's balance.
Absolutely. Well, I love hanging out with you. I hope that we can do this again when you hit some other amazing milestone, or just come back and tell us what it feels like, just to kind of ease into the day-to-day. Either way, you're just so much fun to have around. I appreciate your time.
It is always so great to catch up with you. I love the dialogue and love all the things that you're doing. So thank you for hosting me, and I can't wait to listen to this and all your others.
Sounds good. Have a great day.
And I'm not coming down.
I'm a fan of living intentionally versus habitually. And what a great example Meggie provides of just that. Thanks for being here. And if you haven't yet, subscribe, leave a review. It's super fun. We love it. Make it a great day.
I'm not coming down. I never left it on the ground. I'm not coming down. I wanna go